All right, hey, what's up, guys? We have Cameron here. He is a neuroscience major, I guess. He's getting his PhD. So, how's it going, Cameron? How you doing today?
Hey, going pretty well. How about you?
Good. So, can you tell us a little bit about yourself first, and then we'll go from there?
Yeah, so I did an undergrad in basically philosophy with a bit of neuroscience and psychology, but it's mostly basically a philosophy major. And then went on to apply to PhD programs and then started PhD in neuroscience. So I'm wrapping up right now. And the topic is it's what's called systems neuroscience. You kind of look at I might record like 10 to a couple thousand neurons and then figure out some fact about the brain. And hopefully that gives us some insight into how it works. In my case, I work with mice and I'll look at like the visual part of the brain.
Okay, cool. So, what are some of the topics you wanted to cover today?
I'm happy to talk about pretty much anything. I talk about kind of life as a grad student. I talk about the techniques neuroscientists use. We can chat about philosophy things. That's interesting.
Okay, cool. So, yeah, we talked a little bit beforehand about what exactly, but let's just do yeah. So what do we know so far? Or how much do we know about the brain so far?
Uh, tough to summarize. It So we have some insights into pieces of it that are really interesting, but I think there's a massive amount that's still unknown. So we can look at some neurons in the brain and understand that these neurons seem to be really important to do certain behaviors, especially when you get to really simple animals. It becomes easier to say that neuron X does something for the animal. But then when you get up to people, it's much harder to give single functions or purposes to individual neurons. And you can have general ideas about brain areas. So, right, we know that there's this part of the brain in the back that's really important for vision. We know that there are different pieces that seem important for different parts, but we don't really have like a grand unified theory of brains at this point.
Okay. So you're currently getting your PhD, right? So
Mhm.
you're not actually you're probably practicing as you're getting it, right? But you don't have like your full-time job as a neuroscientist, right?
So
Or
it
do
so it's
you?
kind of so it's kind of so the for PhD programs in the US, usually it's 2 years of classes and then a couple years where you just do research full time and you actually get paid for all of this. So I get a stipend, and at this point, I just do research full time as my job and then get paid for it.
That's pretty sweet. And then is that what you will do when once you graduate? It'll probably just be full-time um research kind of thing. Is that your goal, or
It
teach, or
for a bit, it'll probably be research. I might eventually go into something more programming related or more data sciencey. So we'll just see how things evolve over time.
okay? And then what is your goal as, I guess, what would be your goal? Like if you had to do like a I don't know if you've already like written one of those like papers that PhDs have to write, but
Mhm.
what would be like the topic that you would want to cover? Have you written one? What are those called? Like the final
So yeah, I'm working
paper?
on my thesis right now.
Yeah,
So I'm in
okay.
the
So what
writing step.
yeah, what's your
So
thesis on?
thesis is on, so there's another cell in the brain. So people usually talk about the brain and talk about neurons. That's sort of the really flashy cell that everyone knows. There are a lot of other cells in the brain. One type of cell is called glia, and there are different kinds of glia cells. And it seems like for a while, people kind of thought of them as they're just glue. It's almost like a sidewalk for the neurons. They just held them up and did nothing else really. And more recently, we've realized that they might be doing something really important for how we think, and they might even be doing things like computations or figuring out things about the world and then changing how we act. So that's sort of my research area, how these glia might change how our brain works, especially in the visual part of the brain, in my case.
Okay, and I had a guy on before, and we kind of talked about we were talking about AI and futurism, and
Mhm.
do you think we're either at the point or eventually we'll get to the point where we can just totally replicate the brain? And I know, well,
That
I also see. I want to talk about like I'm not. I feel like I'm gonna botch this interview because you're like a professional neuroscientist, and I want to talk about all like the crazy like
no,
AI
I'm fine chatting about
futurism.
stuff.
But
Yeah.
okay, yeah. So, do you think that we're at a point, or will get to a point, where we can replicate the brain? Because from a novice's understanding, it almost seems like we should or could. Like we don't really fully understand the brain, but it almost seems like
Mhm.
would we be able to replicate it? And then also, would we be able to put it like into like they talk about putting the brain into a computer so that you could like potentially
Mhm.
live forever through like your consciousness would be inside of the computer or whatever. Like, um, are those two things possible, or could they be possible in the near future?
Um, so one thing I say is right. This is my opinion. So I don't have like a study that proves this one way or the other. For the first question, could we replicate a brain? I guess there's a question of at what level do you mean? So like a plane kind of replicates birds flying, but doesn't actually like have wings that flap necessarily. So in one sense, it does replicate it. In another sense, it doesn't. So someone might say like large language models kind of replicate pieces of how our brain works. I I think like a fully fleshed out simulation of our brain in all its detail, I don't imagine that being possible for an extremely long time, if ever. So I like if I had to put a gamble on it, it'd be like 1,000 plus years that we could actually simulate everything related to it. Um, I remember someone actually has asked me that question before, and they asked like, could we have an AI? And this was a couple months before ChatGPT got released, and I gave that same answer. And then now I'm not thinking that we're gonna have AI in like a couple years, but or at least AI that equals a human level brain. But I'm kind of questioning that estimate now, so I'm a bit more uncertain.
Yeah, well, what is it about like what is it about the brain that we can't replicate it? Because it seems like if we it seemed like if we had all the material that's in the brain, which it seems like we can manage to get, it seems like we could just replicate it. But is it the fact that
Mhm.
the neurons and all that kind of stuff is firing so quickly that we're just not able to like manage that, or what is the part that we wouldn't be
No,
able
it's like
to
really good.
replicate?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So they people when they talk about the brain, they commonly talk about the connections, right? So you like imagine you had every single detail on every single neuron and what it was wired up to, right? So I knew neuron A connected to neuron B and D, and for every single neuron in the brain. I think that there's a lot of computation that our brain does that's not actually the connections themselves, but happens inside a single neuron. So there's some papers where neurons can actually use the chemicals inside of themselves to perform some kind of computation, and that wouldn't be captured if you just knew what was wired up to what. And I know there's some research that actually they try to predict what a neuron is doing, and they'll use like a deep neural network just for one neuron, and they'll need like this massive neural network to capture what this neuron is doing and all the different things it's kind of changed by in terms of like what the animal like if the animal's scared or what the animal's looking at. So that's why I feel like there might be like it might be that a single neuron requires a lot more to model it than just what a neural network currently does or what a deep neural network currently does, where it just sort of takes some inputs, does a math thing to it, and then sends an output. So that's where
Okay,
that comes from
so
for me.
would you say it's kind of, it almost sounds like it might be like a quantum physics thing where it's like it's so like the particles, and I'm also interested in this, but I know nothing, not enough about it, but where the particles are moving around and like it's hard to like figure out where they're at. So it's almost like you don't really know. It's almost a, I know they can predict things with the particles in quantum physics, but with the brain, it's almost like hard to know exactly. Um, it's just almost impossible to know exactly what it's doing based on kind of like what's happening to the animal at the time. Is that what it is?
It's kind
It
of
could be
like yeah, it's like it's so there's a person I think their name's Penrose where they think that quantum mechanics in neurons is actually really important for consciousness, and they're really into that.
Roger
In my
Penrose.
yeah, in my case,
Yeah.
I'm thinking more like at the protein level. So I wouldn't be thinking as much about like quantum mechanics makes it crazy difficult, even if we didn't have quantum mechanics, but things somehow worked out well regardless. I think the if the neuron was not like a simple machine, but imagine a neuron was like a full computer in and of itself, then if I told you all the connections in the brain, that might massively kind of undercount how much computation and how much processing is going on in it. So that's kind of my intuition at the moment.
Okay. And then so we asked if we could replicate the brain. And then, I mean, it seems like I heard 20 years ago that we were already at the point where we were like cloning animals and stuff. Like, are we able to,
Mhm.
and me and that AI futurism guy talked about this too, but, um, are we at the point where we can clone? It sounds like we're not at the point where we can clone the brain, but have we cloned animals? Could we clone humans at this point?
So so cloning's not my specialty in terms of like cloning trying to clone a mammal. We, from what I understand, we can clone mammals, and that's been done like you said, like decades ago. And I don't think there's a reason that we couldn't do it to humans besides just ethics concerns. But I think also you could have you have like genetically identical twins, and they go on to be very different sometimes in how they do things. So I don't, so that wouldn't necessarily be like a clone of the brain in my mind.
Yeah, but I mean that's the thing is like if we're not able to replicate the brain, how would we be able to clone someone? Because wouldn't you need to replicate in order to clone? Don't you need to essentially make build another brain that's just like the other brain?
Yeah, so if your like rule for what counts as cloning is you have a exact copy of a person's brain, I don't think we can do that. I'm not sure if we ever could do that. And if your rule is instead you just have the same genes, then that is possible currently, but not
But
the
if
like
you
brain. Mhm.
but if you had the same genes, wouldn't that if I cloned you, same genes, and it was like basically we just brought about another you as the identical twin to you,
Yeah.
wouldn't that essentially be we would have the brain in there, so then we could, right, in the
So you have
head.
the brain in there, but then all the experiences would be really different, right? It's like, let's say you clone me and had like a baby version of me today. That would be a me that like grows up in the age of like phones and all these technology and internet compared to like me growing up as a kid where I didn't have access to all of that. And that could dramatically change, right? My personality and how my brain is hooked up. And there's probably some consistencies you'll find between there, but there's probably a lot that experience is going to mess with.
But so if we cloned you, it would literally be cloning you as a baby. It wouldn't. We couldn't clone you as your current self.
No, so it'd be like imagine you have so you have like a sperm and egg kind of come together, and then that eventually divides a bunch and that eventually becomes a baby, right? And then you basically take out the DNA that's inside and you stick in the DNA of like me, for instance. And then you have that cell continue to divide. So then the genetic code matches me perfectly, but that's the stage where you would like duplicate me essentially at the single cell level. And then everything development wise that happens after that is kind of completely different, right? So for instance, it would be like a different mother, or at minimum, it would be the same mother at a different age. Like that could be changing things a bit. So there could be a lot of stuff that changes slowly.
But
Um,
in a sense, am I wrong when I say we could that would still be kind of replicating the brain because the baby would have a brain, or
so
would it be
it would
different
be,
because we would literally have to like manufacture you? Like, would a woman have to give birth to your, or we have like the pods or whatever that will give birth, right? But I mean, if
mhm.
we're able to do that, it almost seems like I guess it's two separate things though. What like if we could like literally replicate your brain in a lab is different than like cloning you as a baby to come out with a brain. Like that doesn't mean that we're manufacturing the brain, right?
Yeah. So like the way I think about it is, let's say you had that map of connections, right? What is every single neuron in my brain connected to? That map, if you had me right now and you had a clone of me that you aged up to where I currently am at, that map would probably be different just because experience changes the synapses that you make and changes the connections that you make. But there's going to be some similarities, right? So maybe I'm predisposed to some like disease in the brain, and then that's going to be there in that twin. And maybe there's some broad things like let's say I had a certain kind of neuron and I made a little more of than the average person. You're probably going to find that in the twin too, but that neuron, instead of being hooked up to like neuron 500, it might be hooked up to neuron 501, for instance. Like that's how stuff would change. Does that
Okay.
make more sense?
Yeah, it does, but I'm still finding the disconnect between the brain replicating the brain.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Okay, it's like the
but
DNA inside of the brain is going to be the same. So that we will have copied. So in that sense, you copy the DNA that builds the brain, but then experience is such a big piece that builds that brain, and we can't replicate the experience one to one yet.
yeah, like we couldn't take your brain and turn it into another brain exactly the same,
Mm-hmm.
but we could take a brain and change it a little bit. but
Yeah, we
we
could like we change bits of the brain.
yeah. So it almost seems like we could replicate a brain. It might not be your exact by replicate. I don't mean your exact brain. I just mean take your brain or just a brain in general and make another one.
So I guess yeah, if you just mean that you have a brain that probably looks similar to mine because it has the same genes in it, then you could do that by cloning me and then like growing that baby up. So in
And
that
it
sense,
doesn't even have to
yes.
be your. It doesn't even have to be your brain. It could just be can we create a brain? Period. It doesn't have to be your brain. Just
Yeah, so in that case, right, we still have to have like a whole person grow up. We can't just like grow a whole brain in a dish to like 25 years old and then have be able to like play games hooked up to some crazy network or whatever.
yeah, it would essentially just be take your DNA, put it inside a baby, have the baby go through or not reproduction, but go through the whole process of like birth, right?
Yeah, and you start at like basically the one cell level and then that divides. So you start super early with the baby, like as early as you possibly could. And then from there it goes on.
And would that baby be inside like a woman's womb, or would it be like in like a pod type thing? Because now we
I
don't even need really fully need to use the woman for um birth, right? Like we can use pods or whatever to birth a baby, right? Or
so I so this is way outside my expertise. My very vague understanding is that you can have babies that come out of the womb earlier and earlier compared to say 100 years ago, and we can do enough to keep them alive and help them right develop and live. But I don't think you could do it from scratch at this point for a human. I also
like you would need the woman. Like you
I
weren't like would I be able to take one person like a man's sperm and then a woman's egg, put them together without the woman, put it in some sort of pod, and then like give birth to a baby? Or do you need the woman at this point?
I'm pretty sure you need so like right that's when in vitro fertilization is where you combine the egg and sperm in a dish and then you put it in the woman after the things have started. But I do think you
Yeah.
need like currently we can't replicate the whole process and like all the environment that cell goes through when it becomes a baby.
Okay, that's interesting. For some reason, I thought that there was a like a petri. I forgot what they call it, like a petri dish or something. But anyways, that's outside of neuroscience. That's like birthing
Because
and
that might
stuff.
be like in vitro. Yeah, because it does start in a petri dish and then you go back into the womb at a certain point.
Okay, so at some point you do need the woman's womb. Like we can't
Mhm.
fully create a baby without one. Okay, so then the other question was, um, could we put a brain inside of a computer, or at least the consciousness part of the brain inside a computer, or do we need the brain for the consciousness aspect of it?
So so at this point, I don't think we fully understand even what consciousness is. So I don't think we know how to move it anywhere. I don't think there's any way we can put it into computers right now, or I'd be extremely doubtful if you could do it even in a very, very long, like hundreds of years. I think there's a second question that comes up with it too. Or let's say that if you just knew all the connections, like that was it, that's all you needed. And then you scan my brain using some magic technology, you got all those connections, and then you put them on a computer, and then you could run that on the computer. I'd still be like sitting here while you start up the computer. So in a sense, that is like a digital copy of me. That's not going to be like me one to one in a certain sense of what I mean by me.
Yeah, like you wouldn't. Yeah, like you wouldn't live on. You couldn't live on forever. It would be an alternate you.
Yeah. Whereas like if someone deletes the hard drive, I'm not like, oh crap, like I'm fading now. I'm still fine. But and then vice versa, like if I just age and die and the computer stays on, like the computer doesn't go away.
Yeah. So it sounds like you majored in philosophy and neuroscience, right? So you do
Mhm.
you do know a bit about philosophy, and I
Yep.
I don't for the most part, but I am very interested in consciousness. So, um, well, first of all, where do you see the future of um, humans at this point with neuroscience? Like, do you feel like we're eventually going to get to the point? Like, do you think it's? But it sounds like you don't think it's possible for us to replicate the brain inside of a computer. But do you think it's possible at this point or a point in the future to live forever? Like I know that that guy, I don't know if you've heard of that tech guy, Brian Johnson, who wants to live forever.
Um, I don't know Brian Johnson. I know there's like an older researcher like Aubrey de Grey that's really into like longevity and trying to cure aging.
Yeah,
Um,
this guy Brian Johnson, I just listened to him on a podcast too. He's this I think he started Venmo or something and sold it. He's a billionaire, but he supposedly he says he's the healthiest man alive, and he's trying to live forever. That's his goal. Like don't
mhm,
his thing is don't die, and he really thinks that he's going to be able to do this. So with the help of not only health and like living a perfect, just an absolute perfect diet, having a perfect diet with technology, do you think we'll one day get to that point where will be able to live forever?
hmm. I'm honestly not sure. I might My intuition is that they're like maybe not, or there might be some weird thing. Have you heard of the this philosophical idea called ship of Theseus?
What is it?
It's like ship of Theseus, it's called. It's like a thought experiment.
No, I don't think so.
Where the idea is like you have a ship and it's starting to fall apart. So you kind of take some planks off the ship and then put in new planks, right? And then as it's falling apart, you keep fixing stuff. And then you just throw the old planks in some, I don't know, like some dumpster somewhere, and someone slowly takes those old planks and then rebuilds the ship from all the planks that you threw away. And eventually you've replaced every single plank in that ship, and someone made via all the old planks a perfect replica of the ship. And the question is like which counts as the real ship at this point? So does the old one that got taken apart and then rebuilt count as like the true old ship, or does the new one that got everything replaced still count? And there's this question I might have of let's say we have like a crazy future where you can replace neurons or piece of your brain with computers. I don't know at a certain point when that might stop being you and become like a replica of you. So that's sort of an interesting philosophical question.
I would think that in that case, it would be, I would think that the boat would be the same because it's the exact same material.
So like
But
the
I
the
could,
out of the old wood, the boat.
yeah, both boats, like before and after, would be the same boat because it's the same material and there's nothing special going on.
Mhm.
But, yeah, I was listening to like Jordan Peterson. You know Jordan Peterson?
Mhm.
Yeah, I was listening to him recently on Alex. Do you know who Alex O'Connor is?
Uh, maybe I don't, not very well. Okay.
He's like an atheist who will like debate Christians, and Jordan Peterson went on as a I don't even know what I'd call him, you know, but it's like basically he couldn't answer the question of like did he believe that all that kind of stuff was real or not. But he kind of said like how people will go and visit like Elvis Presley's guitar. Like everybody wants to go see his guitar, but he was like, if it wasn't the same, if it wasn't Elvis Presley's exact guitar, but it was the same model, same year, everything, would people want to go visit it? And he was like, I don't know why people like wouldn't. It's the same thing. And it's like, no, it's different because Elvis Presley played it,
Mhm.
and there's blood and sweat or whatever on it. You know what I mean? So in that context, I could see how it would be different. But in a situation like this with the boat, I would just assume it would be the same. I don't know though, but I guess you can kind of get into who wrote on it, and yeah, what do
Yeah,
you
because you can
think?
say like with the blood, sweat, and tears, you can say like, oh, like here are the stains from this fight that the ship had. You can see it on the old ship or like the rebuilt one,
Yeah,
but on the new one, it's gone. Like, does that really count? It feels like it's lost its history.
yeah,
So you I'm sure there's like way more complex versions of this nowadays in like philosophy, but that's like the very old one or old thought experiment. But I guess the question relating to living forever, so that's kind of one more philosophical idea. Intuitively, I'd be surprised if we could do that. It seems really, really tough. Also, I might just be a little pessimistic, and 1,000 years from now, that'll seem like a really silly idea.
yeah. And then so getting more into like the philosophical type stuff, like the Sam Harris, Jordan Peterson. I mean, it just doesn't seem like there's like too many like really great philosophers nowadays, right? It's like when you say Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson, like I mean, I know there was Daniel Dennett, but he died recently. I don't know. It just kind of seems
Mhm.
like who do we have anymore, you know? But yeah. So what are your thoughts on consciousness in general? Like, how do you why do you think we have it? How do you think we have it? Where did it come from? Like, I would assume you would probably be more of a materialist than like a
Mhm.
idealist, right? Because I mean, I feel like most like scientists are, but
Yeah, you'd be
yeah,
surprised. There's a chunk of scientists that are materialists that I know. So it's not that's not guaranteed at all. I lean toward materialism. The thing I lean toward would be called functionalism, where I think if you have some pieces of matter and they perform the right functions and roles, that counts as consciousness. I know that there's like a lot of counter arguments against that though. I don't think there are I don't think it's there's like knockdown arguments against those counter arguments. Jokingly, there's a philosopher who came up with the idea called crazyism, where he said that we tried all the sane philosophies of mind for like what consciousness is, and all of them don't seem to be the right answer at this point. Like all of them seem to have problems. So whatever is the correct answer is going to seem crazy to us whenever we find it. So I
it's
kind of
almost
jokingly say that, yeah, that's my philosophy at this point.
it's almost like whatever we find out to be true is going to be something that like nobody's even like really thought of, basically.
Well, it'll sound like crazy unintuitive. So imagine, like if you like way back when you take math classes, if you ever got to the step where people talk about imaginary numbers, that's like really weird and like really unintuitive. That sounds kind of crazy. So it might be something like that where when
What
you
was
first
that?
hear about it,
Magic numbers?
oh, imaginary numbers.
Oh, okay, okay. What
Have
are
you ever?
those?
Oh, okay. So that's how would I do it? So let's say you take so you have -1, right? They take the square root of -1. Usually people hear that you can't take the square root of a negative number. But in our case, we're going to say, okay, the square root of -1 equals this new number we're going to call I. And people call it that. They sometimes call it like imaginary number. And using that idea, you can then create this whole new branch of mathematics and do all these cool math tricks. But it's really weird and unintuitive because for square root, it's like, okay, it's right. If you multiply these two things together, you get the number that's under the square root sign. It's like square root of 4 is going to be 2 because 2 times 2 equals 4. I times I equals -1 is a really weird thing to hear and think about, especially when you first hear about it.
Couldn't you just do it? I mean, I'm not good enough with math to where I would know this, but couldn't you just do -1 squared would be whatever the square of one would be, but like negative in the negative sense? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, so I understand the question. I think the idea is that in mathematics, you can like kind of play around with it and come up with weird rules like that and just be like, I'm just going to assume that this thing equals this weird thing. But you start breaking other pieces of mathematics that you might really want to keep. So for instance, like imagine I had a new rule that I thought was really cool, but then I broke the fact that like 2 plus 3 equals the same thing as 3 plus 2. Like if I swap the order, suddenly it doesn't equal the same thing anymore. I might really care about losing that. So I don't care about adding my cool fact because then I've lost a bunch of really important things. So that's sort of the balance you're doing when you're doing some things with math. Once again, I'm not a mathematician, so if anyone's a mathematician, they might get really angry at my explanation.
yeah, no problem. But anyways, I cut you off with the imaginary numbers thing, but you were talking about how it would be some crazy thing like imaginary numbers,
Yeah, it
how
might be like just
consciousness would
super
be. Yeah,
unintuitive. Mhm.
yeah. So I mean, it would probably be something that we haven't even thought about, basically, right?
Yeah, we haven't thought about, or maybe we did, and we just laughed out of the room because it seems so weird or silly.
Yeah,
And then eventually people are like, no, that's definitely right.
yeah. Well, I recently did like a video because I'm just trying to learn more about physics. That's and consciousness and all that kind of stuff. But I recently did a video on YouTube where I did the. Have you heard of the Boltzmann brain hypothesis?
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. So it's like the universe is so crazy and quantum physics or whatever is so crazy that in like the vast like way ahead in the future when we're all dead and gone, like random brains can kind of just like form
Mhm.
and like I wouldn't be able to explain why or but um something like that seems kind of crazy and then you kind of think like if a random brain just formed in the universe we could potentially be living like inside of that brain, which is essentially like
Mhm.
idealism. Um, but yeah, it's just I guess it would be something like that where it's just so crazy we have no clue. Right now, like I would say that I'm a materialist, but like I'm leaning the thing that makes the most sense to me would be something like the simulation theory,
Okay. Mhm.
which if it wasn't materialism, what are your thoughts on the simulation theory?
I someone had a really like good counter argument against it, and I also can't remember. It sounded like pretty abstract. I kind of seems a little bit weird to me. It doesn't seem very intuitive. I mean, I don't think there's any way to disprove it right now, but this is just sort of like a random intuition. It's not really some deeply thought out argument I have where it's like, oh, clearly this is wrong. So I'm not sure I believe it, but what makes it feel like it's right to you?
Well, I mean, there's so many different things that I want to discuss involving all these ideas, but is well, one Nick Bostrom, he came up with like
Mhm.
the simulation theory hypothesis, which I think it was something along the lines of like eventually a civilization would live long enough to get to a point where like they pretty much will just build a simulation, which we're already to that point where like we're building simulations, and then like, eventually we might be able to get to the point where we could build a full civilization with consciousness in it. And there was I think there's three reasons why they wouldn't, and it would be like ethical reasons or like for some reason they just couldn't. But basically I mean, I wouldn't be able to summarize any of these people's ideas well, but basically it's kind of like if our civilization lives long enough to get to a point where they could do that, or an alien civilization, I would imagine that they would. The big questions that I have are, I think, similar to other people's, which is like, why would they build this civilization? My civilization seems extremely boring. Um, but listening to like a lot of different people who talk about consciousness, they kind of make it like the guy that I was just listening to on Joe Rogan. He seemed a little out there. Like at one point, what lost me was he said that he felt like I think his name was Thomas Campbell. He felt
Mhm.
like he was brought into this world, for a reason type thing. One of those like where he feels like
Okay.
he kind of knows things, and he was talking about intuition over rationality and all that kind of stuff. But he says that he's able to explain that we are living inside of consciousness, and then also Donald Hoffman. I don't know if you know who he is, but he also believes that we are living inside of consciousness. And like I said, I would say materialism, but if it's not materialism, then I would say that it's the simulation. But in terms of materialism, I think that the thing that makes the most sense would be I'm like forgetting the guy's name who came up with it, but then also the name of what it is. But basically, it's similar to what you said, where as the brain is full of like a bunch of different stuff going on, it creates consciousness in a material sense. There's
Mhm.
nothing like weird about it going on. Um, do you know what that's called?
We say like it creates so it could be like the thing I mentioned, like functionalism, where it's just like the matter is wired up in the right ways so that it causes this thing called consciousness to pop up.
Yeah,
Um, there, I'm trying to think. There could be other things that my undergrad philosophy degree is failing me to remember them all. Um, I think there's another one called panpsychism people talk about. And
yeah,
the idea is that like every single particle has a tiny bit of consciousness, but super, super rudimentary. And then if you throw enough together in the right way, then you get out something that's like, very, very conscious, like people are. And then animals kind of have this intermediate consciousness and things. I think maybe I don't know if you've heard of this one that you might be talking about. It's like integrated information theory.
that's what it is. Yeah,
Okay. That's right, the one where it's there's this very unique way that information is, or some, I don't think I understand enough to explain it, but basically that these, you can have a bunch of systems and they have this certain relationship with each other, and then you calculate some number, and then this number tells you something about like how conscious that system is. You can have like multiple people together count as like a single consciousness, I think. It has some kind of, yeah, weird results too.
Yeah, and the guy, I feel like the guy who either came up with it or definitely believes in it is Max Tegmark. I think that he believes or came up with it,
Um,
or
that sounds familiar.
he's like a physicist, I think, and he deals with like the multiverse and stuff like that. But yeah. So in terms of all of, let's just go over all of them real quick. So we got materialism, we
Okay.
got idealism. You just said panpsychism, and
Hmm.
then the dualism,
Hmm.
um, and then there's like brain in a vat kind of thing, right? Where it's like literally just
Um, so it's kind of like how to put it. So actually, both with simulation and brain in a vat, like you could be either of those things, and then it could be the case that like materialism is true, right? But you're just like very confused about how your external world is, but it's still made out of particles at the end of the day. So like it's a simulation, but on top of particles.
okay. So but when if we were inside of a simulation or brain in a vat, wouldn't it technically really, this would all really kind of just be maybe not consciousness, but like like this really wouldn't, like this desk like really wouldn't be here, right?
Yeah, like it doesn't actually like yeah, there aren't actual particles that make up this desk if it's like a simulation, right? But I guess the idea would be the computer that's running the simulation, assuming that there's like some people outside that are running it, like how are they conscious? And presumably that's going to be because they're either it's something to do with like materialism or you have like some theory of like idealism. And I also don't know how like simulation hypothesis, like what people think about that if you combine it with idealism, but it would be
Well,
interesting
yeah,
to look up.
I kind of thought that. I was like the simulate when people talk about idealism, it almost makes me think of the simulation because
Mhm.
when they try and describe what's out there and they'll say just consciousness, and it's like, well, where did that consciousness come from? And it almost seems like it makes the most sense to say that consciousness is inside a computer, essentially. Like just like when I use my computer, and a lot of times people will like Donald Hoffman will like say this, where like, have you heard of Donald Hoffman?
Um, I off the top of my head, I'm might not be sure. I'm bad with names, but once I like hear an idea, I might be able to remember the person.
He's like a pretty interesting guy where like he said that essentially essentially he's just an idealist. But when I first heard him, he said like we evolved we evolved for survival, not truth. So like
Hmm.
when we see something like that we think we're seeing, we're not really seeing that. And when I as I first heard that, I took it as kind of like, okay, like when I see this lamp, it doesn't really look like a lamp. I just view it that way. But
Hmm.
he's just totally like, no, it's just we are fully inside of consciousness. And he has more to his theory besides that, obviously, but it's all just like really interesting to me, basically. And but yeah,
Yeah, it's actually. Oh, sorry.
he
Go
he just uses the
ahead.
example of essentially like if I'm playing GTA 5 on my computer or whatever, and I'm seeing the red car. It's not really, the red car is not really there. It's like programmed inside the computer, which just makes
Hmm.
me think of just a simulation. But yeah, I mean, I'm definitely out of my league with this, but like it is interesting to me, and I kind of feel like it does go with the brain, obviously, but it's like how does the brain have consciousness in the first place? Yeah.
Hmm. I
What
think
were you gonna
actually it's
say now?
funny. There's a with that idea that oh, we evolved for survival, not truth. Therefore, you can't really trust what you're perceiving. There's a I don't know if he's the first person to describe it that way, but there's a Christian philosopher that uses that to argue that God must exist, basically, where he essentially says, "Oh, we shouldn't be able to find the truth really well because we evolved to just survive. It doesn't matter if we believe the sky is purple as long as that helps us live longer. But clearly, we do know enough facts that we can like build cars and do all these cool things. So there must be some other reason that we know the truth. Therefore, God." Um, so it's funny that people can go two entirely different directions with that same argument.
Yeah. Are you religious at all or no?
No, I would be atheist.
Yeah. So, in terms of the atheism, like evolution, how do you think, I mean, what are your thoughts on that, I guess, atheism versus religion?
Um, can,
Like
can you explain?
why have you come to be atheist
Oh,
in your research and all that?
I don't think the neuroscience affected it too much. I think like when I was in high school, there's definitely that feeling of like, oh, well, if I'm a soul, like why can't I get drunk? Like why does alcohol change how I judge things if I'm like a soul that's piloting my body like a mecha, essentially? I think that there's like philosophers argue that's not a good argument against religion, but in general, it seemed like I didn't feel like there were enough good arguments for God, and it felt like there was either like an I don't know for a lot of big questions, or there could be just a particle or physical answer here. And that sort of made me start to lean toward atheism. And it felt like a lot of religions were making different claims. And it felt like for instance, there could be miracles that a Christian tells you about. They seem really cool, like really impressive. And then you can talk to a lot of other religions, and there can be just an equally cool set of miracles that they might say, and it might not feel like these are really compatible with each other. And sometimes we might look really deep into it and feel like there actually was some issue. So the miracle story didn't turn out to be as cool as it sounded. So things like that. I'm doing a very bad job of giving like the whole evolution, but
No, yeah, I understand it, and it's like hard for me to kind of like explain everything you think too. But it's like you hear somebody say something, and then you try and like or I try to regurgitate it, and it's like just doesn't come out the same. But in terms of evolution, how do you think we got here? I mean, I would just assume you believe the same
oh
as everyone else, right? Like,
yeah, I assume just evolution.
yeah. But then there's even problems with that, right? Like with like,
Like what kind?
well, like well, the obvious one would just be like what started it, which nobody really has an
Mm.
answer for, you know what I mean? Um, and like they'll say the Big Bang, but then now they're saying like there could have been stuff before the Big Bang. There's even like the multiverse where
Hmm.
it's like, or the Big Bang could have been like the start of our universe, and then eventually it'll end, and then there'll be like another Big Bang. So I don't know. It's so hard to talk about, but
Yeah.
I'm just fascinated with like how we got like some people will say like how like why and how did we get consciousness? Because a lot of philosophers will say like we don't really need to be conscious, and I kind of disagree with them where I'm like I think that consciousness needed to come about for us because they talk about philosopher like a philosophical zombie. I don't know if
Hmm.
you've heard that term where it's like basically
Yeah.
someone just like you or I, but they have no consciousness. It's just it's just all black. But I feel like the reason why we have, and there could be like there must be some sort of like argument to this, but it's like I feel like we have adopted consciousness so that we would react to things. Like if we weren't reacting to things, if we were a philosophical zombie and we weren't reacting to things, we wouldn't do anything. But the reason why we do what we do is just reacting. Like if we get punched in the face, you're going to react. If you need food, you're going to eat. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think there's sort of I think with that idea, I think there's one question where it feels like you don't need consciousness to do a lot of normal things. Like take like a fruit fly, like you can smack it and it'll like react and fly away or do some response. I don't think anyone is sitting here thinking fruit flies are super conscious at all.
But
Um,
they probably are conscious, right? Like at some
um,
level, like they know that something is trying to kill them, and they're trying to prevent that.
so I guess it depends on what you mean. So it's so you can have like an idea where it's almost they got super tiny amount of consciousness and humans have like a massive amount because it seems like we have this very like intricate world and experience compared to probably what a fruit flies feels. But yeah, fruit flies are going to get scared and like want to survive. Like they're going to run away from pain. And they actually there's a hilarious paper that I think they said fruit flies when they get rejected, they'll drink more alcohol. So if they like try to mate with another fruit fly and then get passed up, they'll drink more than if they were successful. So
Oh
it could be really
wow!
funny. Yeah, so it could be really funny behaviors that they have.
So
I
where would they even get the alcohol?
The scientist would give it to them in this case.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Um, I've also heard that like with laughing, like like you don't really think about this stuff with like evolutionary biology or psychology. Like with
Mhm.
laughing, it's like a way essentially, comedy or laughing is like a way to like kind of like relieve stress or whatever. And I've heard that like even with like mice or something, like when they know they're about to die, like they'll kind of like start like it's some animal will like start like laughing or something. It's something weird like that.
I don't know if I've heard that. I know mice you can actually, and like rats in particular, you can actually tickle, and they will like have this like chirping sound that they'll make that humans can't hear in response to the tickling.
Yeah,
So you
but
do have, hmm,
it's just kind of interesting to know, yeah, why we're doing what we're doing, and it's like even though it doesn't feel automatic, like it laughing doesn't like if I don't really want to say like you choose to laugh, but like it almost feels like you're making decisions and you're choosing everything, but everything really when it comes down to it is kind of just like um almost like natural behavior, just like an animal would have. But like we
yeah, it
as
almost is like
humans,
automatic.
yeah. And that kind of gets us, I don't know if we've covered the consciousness enough, but that kind of gets us into the do we have free will debate.
Hmm.
So do you think we have free will?
So I do, and I'm what would be called like a compatibilist in the philosophy literature.
And why do you feel that way?
So I think
Is
the
that also called like egalitarian free will or something like that? I've heard that term
um
before.
I don't know if I've heard of that. Yeah, so I'm not sure.
It might
Capitalism
not
free
be
will.
egalitarian. It might be like yeah, I'm forgetting the word, but anyways, what is your view on free will?
So it's kind of like a long-winded explanation,
Sorry,
but the
it might be sorry, it might be libertarian
oh
free will.
libertarianism. Yeah, so
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that'd be like we do have free will, and then I think basically like therefore things aren't determined, or we can like break the determinism of the universe in some way. I think it's that.
Like we're kind of bound by the laws of physics, but we can still make decisions that aren't bound by the laws of physics, right?
I think yeah, I try to remember. It might be some people argue that like, oh, there's some fancy quantum mechanical thing you can use to make it so that like you can be free, the universe can be predetermined. I don't buy that, but that could be one I'd say maybe, or like a soul would be a natural, like a natural one, where like our souls get to act outside of physics a little bit. Um, so in the compatibilist idea, the idea is that you could have like one set future, but you could still be free. And in my case, I kind of think about free will as I really care about free will because I really care about if I can blame or praise someone, right? I think there's a professor that had a great intro story where the very first like thing he said as he entered the class was like, my dog pissed on my sleeping bag yesterday. I can't get mad at it because it's a dog. But if I gave you my sleeping bag and you pissed on it right before class, I can get mad at you. So philosophy is about who you can get mad at and who you cannot get mad at. Um,
Yeah.
but that sort of idea I think is why like one big thing we care about, or the big thing we care about when it comes to free will. And the thought experiment is something like this, where let's say you had like John Wilkes Booth and some evil neuroscientist jumps back in time and plants a chip in John Wilkes Booth's brain. And what happens is if John Wilkes Booth, right before he goes off and attacks Lincoln, if he decides, you know what, I'm not doing this anymore, the chip activates and suddenly he gets super motivated to go do it and he goes and does it anyways. But let's say that he wakes up in the morning, he's determined, and then he goes to the theater and everything kind of plays out how it does in history. In that case, we kind of feel like he's still responsible, even though he was forced, like he's set in stone that his future either the chip activates and he goes and assassinates Lincoln, or the chip doesn't activate and he goes and assassinates Lincoln. But in the alternative, where he decides, I want to do this, and the chip triggers, and he decides, all right, or well, doesn't decide, but then he kind of just feels like he wants to go go to the theater and do everything and does it. It feels like in that second case, he's not as blameworthy for some reason. I guess are the intuition people have. So do you, when I explain this convoluted thought experiment, do you have that same intuition, or do you feel like no, he doesn't count as like as he counts as equally responsible in both? Oh, sorry, I think your audio is cutting out.
Sorry, it's kind of a complicated one. So if they gave him a pill, sorry, I totally kind of messed up on it. If they gave him a pill to not do it and he did it anyways,
So it's basically like there's a chip in his brain,
Or a chip, yeah.
and yeah, and then basically it will force him to do it if he decides he doesn't want to.
Yeah.
So he could either be like, you know what, I'm going along with this plan that I have with all these collaborators and going assassinating Lincoln, or he could be like, I'm out, I want to do this, and then the chip basically forces him to go do it, anyways. So in one case, we feel like oh, that's his fault, like he did this, and he should be blamed for it. In the other case, we feel like oh, he's kind of forced into it. But the weird thing is that the future is fixed. Like whatever happens, history is going to unfold how it unfolded, and he's going to assassinate Lincoln. So the idea there is that there might be something about like how you feel about your actions, kind of like how your beliefs are set up with your actions. That seems really important for free will. And for that, you don't need to have a future that could be anything. Like you could have a future that's set in stone and still have some cases where someone does something that's kind of in line with all their beliefs and their feelings, and other times where they do something that's completely against all their beliefs and feelings.
It's a complicated one. For some reason I'm not able to wrap my head around the first one. So like would he be guilty if he went and did it regardless of the chip telling him to, basically? Or
Like legally guilty.
well, no, I'm asking what the thought experiment was.
Oh, so the idea would be that in one case he seems to have free will, and in another case he doesn't seem to have free will. Right? That like the evil neuroscientist took away his free will with that brain chip.
Yeah.
But if you can't be free, if there's only one possible future for you, then it seems like that seems to go against what we feel like in the thought experiment. Because it feels like he has one future, which is he goes and assassinates Lincoln, but then there are two different paths he takes to get there. And it seems like we care about the path that he takes to get there, even though the future is set in stone. And if we were kind of like incompatibilist, where we think that free will is incompatible with a future that's set in stone, that doesn't seem to fully make sense.
Yeah. It's a complicated one. For some reason I'm not able to like wrap my head around that one. But
It's like yeah, like I said, it's a very convoluted thought experiment.
what's up?
It's a very like convoluted thought experiment. Yeah.
Yeah. Um but yeah, so you're a compatibilist, meaning I'm still not like totally like understanding what the compatibilist means.
So like let's say it is set in stone that tomorrow I order like spaghetti for dinner or something. I feel like some people would say that because that of that fact, you don't have free will, right? Because it's set in stone, like you couldn't change it. Therefore, you don't have free will. I feel like depending on how I felt as I was ordering that spaghetti, I could have free will or I could not have free will. So I think you can't have free will even though future set in stone vis-a-vis spaghetti.
Okay, so it's kind of like if I'm supposed to go to work at tomorrow at 8 a.m. and that's really gonna happen, but then I wake up and I feel kind of like, you know what, I'm just not gonna go in today. That kind of breaks the 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 no free will.
Um,
Like at that point you could like change your mind basically.
not not so much that. So like imagine you go into like a fortune teller's um office room and they tell you like, all right, this is the person you're going to marry in the future. And you know that somehow you know with 100% certainty that that's true, that that is going to happen. Nothing you can do is going to change that fact. So it could be that you learn that and then you try as hard as you can to not marry this person, and then someone blackmails you and then you marry them because of blackmail or something. You're kind of like, God damn it, prediction came true. So that could be one way. Another way could be that you're like, I don't want to do this. And then you meet the person and you're actually like, oh, they're kind of cool. Like, let's go on some dates or let's hang out at least. I'm going to marry you. And then you keep on hanging out with the person. And they're like, you know what? Actually, I do want to marry you. And then go and marry them. The fortune teller might tell you like your future is stuck. Like no matter what, 10 years from now, you're gonna be married to person X. So one person would feel like that means that they weren't ever free to make that choice because the fortune teller kind of told them like, hey, this is how it's gonna be. You don't get an option here. Other people would say that people like me would say that because you felt either you were like genuinely like, oh, this is really cool, even if initially you didn't want to go with it, you kind of were convinced or like fell in love and then decided to marry the person, they'd say that was kind of a free choice on your part, even though the future's set in stone, even though the universe might be set in stone in terms of what you have, like what happens to you.
Okay, so even though the universe is set in stone, you're still making the decision
Hmm.
in the end, but ultimately it would still kind of mean no free will because like it's gonna happen. You make the decision to happen, but right? Like tomorrow, the work
Hmm.
for the work example, like tomorrow, I either am or not going to go to work.
Yeah.
When I eventually go to work, I still made that decision. Or if I don't go to work, I made that decision. But either way, one of them is bound to happen.
Yeah. Like let's say, yeah, basically like, let's say somehow I know tomorrow, like you either are going to work or you aren't going to work, then how you feel and what you believe as you're going to work kind of changes if I say that you're free or not. So I think work's kind of bad because in that case, I sometimes I don't feel like I have free will there when it comes to going to work. But
Yeah, exactly. Like that's like the one. It's like I've told you tell people like I told my fiance like I just listened to this podcast where like Robert Sapolsky said we have no free will based on everything, but
mhm,
and she said, well, that would make me feel like why even get out of bed? But it's like no, you still have to do what you have to do. Um, like you still have to go to work tomorrow. Like, you can't just say I'm not going to go, because you have to pay bills or whatever. Like there's still things that you have to do,
yeah,
even though you're going to do them. You're ultimately going to do them regardless. You're going to make a decision regardless, and one's going to happen. But yeah, it's a complicated thing. But Robert, yeah, when that podcast I listened to recently with Robert Sapolsky, he basically said like based on everything that's happened before us, you can go back, millions of years to today. It's all kind of leading up to a point. Like because
hmm
I'm a white male living in this particular area of my age, I was born to my parents, all these things factor in. You basically have no free will. And I think
hmm
there's pros and cons to that, which the pros would be like um we shouldn't really shame people like with the legal system. It's like I mean, even though somebody like, might kill someone or might do something really messed up to somebody, like it just was bound to happen basically. So I think his point, killing's kind of extreme, but some people like don't want to they don't think we should forgive them. But because they had no free will, essentially, like no matter what they did, steal, kill, like we shouldn't really shame them or we shouldn't really like kind of like punish them. Like, yeah,
hmm
you maybe should throw them in jail because of their behavior, but it shouldn't be really about shaming or punishing. And then I guess the con mainly would be like
hmm
if you really feel like you have no free will, then it comes into like why even do anything? But it's like I think that you're ultimately probably going to end up doing what you have to do regardless, like going to work, you're going to have to eat.
hmm
You know what I mean? Like everything's just probably going to play out the way it is. I don't know. It's complicated. It's very interesting for me to listen to. I feel like I'm not doing a great job at like giving my own opinion on it, but um so overall like you do feel like things are set in stone and are going to play out a certain way,
hmm
but your decision still matters, right?
yeah, that basically there's some decisions I take that I think people can, in the philosopher professor's words, they can get mad at me for, and other decisions where I feel like I might not have had a choice and people shouldn't be getting mad at me for. Um, and it seems like my state as I make the choice, like how I feel, really is important for whether I count it as free or not. I know some people, this seems like super divide people, where some people feel like it's super obvious that free will and a set future cannot be together. Like they're just incompatible with each other. And for the people who feel it's like, oh, that makes sense, that seems really reasonable. Um, I've I've come across people that feel really strongly that what I'm saying is just nonsense. Other people that think it's like, oh, that's the only correct solution. So it is a
it
weirdly
doesn't
dividing. Mhm.
it doesn't really make sense to me because like if tomorrow whatever's going to happen and you do it anyway and you say why the free will to do that even though it was going to happen, it doesn't really seem to make sense to me. Like would you
Yeah,
be
and
able to
they're like,
explain like how it does make sense?
could I explain how it does make sense? You asked.
Yeah. like let's say tomorrow, like you are going to go to work. Work may be a bad example because like you kind of almost are forced to do that for money. But let's just
Hmm.
say tomorrow night you're going to have dinner at a certain place at a certain time. You're going to eat a certain thing. How
I
how would you have
guess
the free will not to do that if it's set in stone?
I guess maybe here's maybe the best intuition I could give. Let's throw away the word free will and let's assume that we just straight up don't have free will at all, right? Then let's say you watch my day, you know, like I'm stuck on these rails, like I have to go to certain places and I am just going to go there no matter what. But sometimes when I do those things, it seems like I'm really like this is what I wanted to do in the sense of like, oh yeah, this is what this person likes to do. This is them. I don't know. I'm going to like go pet a cat or play with a dog or something. Right. It's like you see me do that 100 times, so that's something that's reasonable. Then another time, someone like blackmails me and I have to go do something else. And that's really against like my character and what I believe. Let's say in both cases, I don't have free will, but it feels like it's important for us to notice that these two things are different in some way. Like it kind of is like there's a class of things that I do where it's in line with my character and a set of things I do that's not in line with my character. And it feels important to have a word for these two different things. Like it seems like a valuable distinction to make. So I think the idea is some people would say that honestly, free will is the best word to use to like just distinguish these two things. Now people would say that like no, free will's gone, but maybe there is like a word that we should use, like you were coerced in one case and you were kind of, I don't know, doing what you want to do in the other case. Uh, but right, that distinction is still important. So I think maybe that does that make this intuition a bit better?
Yeah, well, it sounds like it's more of an issue of like it's still important to believe you have free will, even though you may not. And I don't think that that like kind of justifies like the true answer. Like I do think that it is important to think you have free will. Like I do think it's important for you to
Mhm.
choose to go to dinner, at 5 o'clock at a certain place or whatever. But if that was ultimately going to happen, I think it's good to believe that was your choice. Like you weren't like
Mhm.
you know you weren't like kidnapped or something, or it was out of your free will. But I still don't think that in my opinion, I still don't think that it's compatible essentially in the sense that like um you know what I mean? Like I kind of just feel like it was bound to play out that way. It's extremely complicated because
Yeah, and to be fair, like there are professional philosophers that are both like incompatibilists like you and compatibilists like me. So it's not like that like one of these positions is like a bad position to have.
well, yeah, and I don't think that I'm not trying to like say that you're wrong or even like debate it. It was just my viewpoint would be if the future is set in stone like you believe, then it's just going to play
Mhm.
out that way. I do, but I also see where you're coming from, where it is important to, I think, to make a decision. Like if you go to the gym because you need to get into shape, I think it's good to be like, you know what? I went to the gym. I'm proud of myself. But
Mhm.
if you were going to do that, regardless of whether you did it for a positive reason or not, it's just going to have it. That would ultimately mean no free will to me.
Yeah, I guess like another like the final metaphor I could use to describe it is it's not so much like benefiting the person, but let's say I like a video game and I had a character and sometimes the character would just like randomly move a direction and it's just like built into the code. The character just like walks a random step. Maybe they're like drunk in the game or something. And it's really annoying to me. And then other times, and let's say the character like it does all of this without me touching the controller. And then other times the character does certain things based on all the stats I gave it ahead of time. It feels like when it's just randomly walking because it's drunk, that's a different kind of action than when it's doing something because of I gave it these stats and it's kind of doing stuff based on how it was built up. And it feels like it's helpful for me to distinguish like, oh, okay, in this case it's just walking left because it's drunk versus this case where it's like, oh, I did something wrong when I was building the character. I need to go rebuild it and do something different. Like, it feels like it's helpful to know that these two things, like what causes these two things, and that they're different kinds of things. And you can get rid of the word free will, but it feels like when we talk about real life, it's still helpful to label certain things, right? When it's kind of like this person wanted to do that. That seems like that tells me something about what they'll do in the future. That tells me something about what they believe or what they feel, versus this person, like keep using the example of like they were blackmailed. that probably doesn't tell me a lot about their character. It does say like, they resist it, they're a really cool person because they took the hit when it comes to blackmail, but doesn't tell me a whole lot about what they think or feel about whatever the action was that they're forced to do. Right. And I know
Ye-
force might be kind of a weird word given all this, but
Well, yeah, like I said, I think that it's very helpful to. I think it's good. I think it's positive. I see from a psychological standpoint. I think that it's good to believe that there are certain reasons people do certain things. But
mm,
from if you nevertheless don't believe in free will because of just the fate of the universe or whatever, then I still wouldn't think that I understand that it's your viewpoint, but I wouldn't think that it would be free will. I think it's good to
mm,
view it as that, but I wouldn't necessarily view it as free will. I think that it's probably a better outlook to have on life than to be like I have no free will. Because no free will is almost like nihilistic. But I almost think that nihilistic can almost be good in some senses because, like I said, with the pros and cons, I kind of feel like if I don't believe in free will and I believe that the universe is just basically over billions of years, just and not over billions of years of evolution, here I am. I'm doing this just because this is bound to happen. I think that I can view it as being like, well, I made a mistake, but kind of like hands up. You know what I mean? It's kind of like what
mm,
this was just meant to be. And like I tend to have even like with serious offenses, I tend to kind of try to be understanding of why people did certain things or why people are in certain positions. But I also understand the opposite. And I could be totally off. I could be totally off here on what you're trying to convey to me. But like, I think that it's good to be like, I went to the gym tonight. I went to work today.
mm,
I'm a productive member of society. But I also feel like there's a lot of people who are just stuck in shitty situations, and that was just bound to happen. It's very hard for me. I think that if I had to, I want to say that I'm like don't believe in free will, but I kind of want to almost say that like there's like a mix, which I think would be libertarian free will, right? Which is kind of like even though
um,
I only have so many amount of options, I still have the choice to make some
I think
options.
like libertarian would be like you do have free will, but sort of there's something that makes you unique compared to how the rest of the universe works. So you get to have free will. Like a soul being an example. It's like, your soul isn't stuck with the laws of physics. It can choose to do things outside of I not out like you can't just like start flying randomly, but you don't have to go along with the exact trajectory of every single particle, kind of thing. But
Yeah,
but yeah, I do it's funny you mentioned the psychologically maybe not believing free will can be helpful at times. I had a friend that mentioned that they did believe in free will and how when they bombed an exam, they'd be like, oh, I mean, I kind of am like, well, it could have turned out otherwise, so I don't feel as bad about it. And they actually kind of got a little bit of a boost from that idea.
yeah, and also like when somebody like cuts you off and you flip them
Hmm.
off or whatever, but then you're like, wait, like they didn't really have that choice. That was just something that just happened. I'm not gonna like really judge that person. I'm just gonna be like, okay, you know what I mean? Like if someone fucks me over, it's kind of like you don't really if somebody keeps fucking you over, like you don't have to keep dealing with them. But at the same time, you can be like, well, that's just their person's, um, that's just who they are. And right? Do you agree with that or no?
No, I think you can. I do think even depend like regardless of how you feel about free will, I think you can be someone that's very understanding when it comes to people and be like, you know what, like there's a lot of things that led them to do this thing, so I'm gonna understand it. Like if they keep ripping me off, like you said, I'm not gonna keep making a deal with them, but at minimum, I'm not gonna be incredibly angry at them. I'm just maybe just gonna stop doing this thing with them or whatever.
But I
Uh,
mean, even going to like the most extreme examples, like would you agree that if somebody kills someone, instead of being like, well, fuck them, they're fucking assholes and they deserve to rot, you could be like, you know what, like that they were just born that way and that just happened to happen. Like one question I wanted to ask you was, you can answer that, but then also like somebody like Jeffrey Dahmer, like
mhm.
do you think they were just going to kill no matter what, even or do you think that they had like a choice to do that? Somebody like with the most extreme case, you know what I mean?
I yeah, so I guess I blanked on the first part of the question.
First part of the question was if somebody murdered someone, like the Luigi Mangione. Well, that's kind of like
Mhm.
complicated, but you could like agree with what he was doing it for. But if somebody murdered someone, do you think you have the right to be like, um, fuck that guy, like they deserve to rot? And
Oh, wait, now, yeah, now I remember. So because the first part is it's kind of like, let's say we have no free will. It's kind of weird because in that case, I don't choose my emotional response to things either, right? So it's kind of strange to be like, oh, I don't have free will, therefore I'm chill because I'm kind of stuck being chill because I don't have free will, if that makes sense. I think the audio might have
sorry,
cut out again.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, no, no, that's true. Yeah, yeah. If you have no, if your reaction is no free will,
Hmm.
then it doesn't matter all the way down, right? It's just like,
Yeah,
I
you're
mean,
kind of like,
it's kind of like nihilistic, right? Where it's just kind of like, oh, what the fuck does anything matter if everything's just gonna play out like a movie, right?
yeah, if you feel like free will is really important for something to be meaningful, then yeah, you do kind of feel nihilistic or you might not really be as into things. The For the second part of the question, I have no idea when it comes to how much someone like Dahmer is free versus not versus like a product of his environment versus something that's yes, science more innate. I usually view things in terms of degrees of freedom where you can, I think most people kind of do this anyways, like day to day, where someone can, I don't know, like let's say someone is super stressed and they're really freaked out and then they kind of respond to you poorly if you ask them a question. Like we're kind of like, oh, I mean, they're freaked out. Like it's not great, but I'm okay. Versus if they just like blow up at me for no reason and they're totally fine that day, I'm gonna be more frustrated with them. Like I feel like they're even more in control and responsible than when they're kind of freaked out. Versus someone is at the extreme end, they're being forced because of some crazy circumstance to yell at me. Like I'm gonna be very understanding in that case. So I guess in Jeffrey Dahmer's case, I I can't recall. I think he had a really messed up childhood, right?
He actually didn't.
Oh, really?
I watched that series on him, and he had a pretty normal childhood. I mean, there was some, I guess you could say maybe a little bit weird stuff, but yeah, it was like basically the dad and the mom fought, and the mom eventually took off. Um,
Hmm.
but overall, it was relatively normal. But that's the whole thing is
Okay.
I think I don't even know if that really matters because like I was just listening to a podcast too about BTK. Um, I don't know if you know who that is, the
I
BTK
don't think
killer.
so.
He's like it's stands for like blind torture kill, but he basically they were talking about him where his three brothers were totally normal and he ended up being a serial killer and his childhood
Hmm.
was pretty normal. So I think it almost comes down in a lot of situations to more of like the brain. Obviously it's both, like some people have it shit from birth, but in his situation, in a lot of the situations, just like their brain's just fucked up. And that kind of goes back to the neuroscience thing where, I mean, I don't know how much experience you have with this and not only with killers, but like, do you kind of feel like it kind of goes to, I guess, the nurture nature thing. Like, do you feel like one's more important than the other? Or do you feel like they're kind of like equally important?
It feels like insanely hard to. This is like a cop out answer a bit, but it feels like it's insanely hard to get the two to come apart at any point because it feels like there's constantly nature related things that then mess with nurture related things and back and forth. So you could have, if you've heard of the term like epigenetics, you can have genes increase expression or decrease expression based on things that happen to you, and that can right? It's not something you inherited from your parents, but it's still something that can like stay with you and you can even pass on. And you can have situations where something nature wise. So I think the example it's given, you might have heard the term heritability, where people will try to like take, say, identical twins, and then one of them is raised by a different parent, and then you try to look at how similar and different they are, and
Yeah,
they try to guess like how heritable something is. So for instance, like schizophrenia is like a very heritable disease. And then something like depression is going to be less heritable, it seems like. But even then, if we had like we were in some universe where let's say if you had red hair, everyone just thought you didn't have a soul or something. So you just got kicked out of every religion. And then you did all the fancy math to calculate heritability. it will come out that like there is a gene that makes you atheist, probably because it's so highly correlated with you being an atheist. But in reality, it's just like the gene for the protein that helps you with red hair, or like does something related to making red hair. And it's just how society reacts to that that makes you, that sort of has these people get pushed to be atheist and makes it seem like there's this cause there that's really not. Does that make sense? That was also a little convoluted.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. In terms of like moral, it's kind of like goes to morals. In terms of morals, do you feel like there is like a objective morality, or do you feel like we've kind of just made up our own morals?
Um, Really good question. I feel like moral philosophy I'm really weak in, so I don't have a strong opinion. Um, I kind of I have had like a personal morality, and then I go with that for most of my decisions. I feel like there's, regardless of the answer, it feels like there's a lot of things that people value that's a bit shared. Like people who really care for their family, they want to have like good friends, they want to enjoy their life and not be, super stressed or just in constant torture every single second. They like to go through like meaningful things. So it feels like there might be more shared than you might expect from people's actions, but that's also just like a random feeling. That's not some neuroscience study related thing.
Yeah, I think that most stuff is, well, at least in America or whatever, in the West, you can say that most stuff is shared, but then you could probably say like, well, it's not shared in certain other countries, or it wasn't shared 2,000 years ago or 4,000 years ago or whatever. Like now, obviously, like slavery is just pretty much
Mhm.
horrendous. Almost, I would say in most countries, but in some countries, it's probably still practiced, right? But 2,000 years ago, slavery was probably just not even like 300 years ago in America. People just kind of agreed to it, or if they didn't like it, they would probably just turn a blind eye. So, I mean, in my opinion about morality, and with all this stuff that I'm bringing up, I'm very interested in it, and like listening to it, but I feel like I'm kind of botching most of it. But it's like, I'm just curious to what you think about this. In my opinion about morality, and this is like my own opinion that I've come up with, but if there is a God, if there is a religion or whatever, then he basically gave us these morals. If there's no God,
Mhm.
then there's pretty much no morals. And you can say, well, yeah, you can make up your own morals, but like nobody really has to agree with them in terms of objective morals. And I'm not stating this as like some sort of like from a religious viewpoint or anything. I'm not like I'm just saying that's just my personal opinion, because if you say your morality is correct and mine's wrong, it's kind of like why? Like, you know what I mean? It's like what,
Yeah.
right? I mean, do you feel like you agree with that, or is there any like
So
counter to that?
I think it's just I think it's the idea, someone mentioned there's a spectrum from like art to math where you can, it feels like for artwork, it's really hard to have someone come in and be like, okay, like I checked your homework, you're wrong. This one is not art. This one is art, right? You get like 0% on your test. Versus mathematics, where someone can like do that, right? If you get like some math homework, very clearly be like, nope, the answer was two. You're wrong here. And there's a question of where morality falls on that. Um, I I'm gonna butcher these arguments, honestly. I think some of the arguments are that there might be something consistent in the morality that people have, and there might be something you can generalize there in terms of what counts as objectively true. So imagine that like if you had some hyper rational people and they were sort of in this like waiting room before birth, before like existence, and they're deciding like how they want to set up society so that they how to put it. So they're deciding how they want to set up society and they get thrown into a random body somewhere and they don't know where they get thrown into. So usually, if you're that kind of person, you probably don't want society where there's like one person that has everything, and then everyone else is just like starving and working for that person. Because there's a 1 out of 1 billion chance that you're that one person that gets everything. So you probably want it that you kind of increase your odds, you're gonna have a pretty okay life. And there could be correct answers to how, as a rational person, you want to set up things. This is all a very long-winded way of saying like this could technically be a non-God way of grounding like what is an ethical thing, what is a moral thing. I think the follow-up question is like, okay, well, why that and not some other convoluted thought experiment you could throw at me? And for that, I just don't know enough of the philosophy of ethics to say there. Um, I do think the one counter argument for the idea that when you look at things like slavery and other terrible things people did, is that people can be really, really bad at finding the correct answer. But that doesn't really tell you that there is not a correct answer, right? Like I wouldn't expect they're like take like the fanciest new mathematics people have. We maybe just figured it out this year or a couple years ago. Even though no one could answer that question for thousands of years, that doesn't mean there wasn't a true answer at the end of the day. It just is really, really hard to figure out. So I think same thing you could argue for morality.
That's true. But um, so I guess ultimately we're kind of just ideally heading towards that kind of correct answer at this point. Like in
So hopefully,
2025,
yeah.
I mean, obviously, like intuitively with free will and intuitively with morality, like I believe, I'm not really trying to say that I don't believe in free will or I don't. Intuitively, I do believe in free will because it feels like I have free will, and intuitively, I believe in objective morality, because I feel
Hmm.
like when I do something, I feel bad, and it's kind of like, where does that come from? And I think it probably comes from how I was raised and how we evolved, and then also the laws, um,
Hmm.
and like what's the punishment for the crime. But in terms of objectiveness, like you were saying, I think you were kind of like leading towards like if 10 people believe that this is wrong and one person doesn't, well, the 10 kind of outweighs the one, right? Um,
I like in
that's
terms of
kind
like
of
how things
that's kind of
actually
like
play
that's
out,
kind of
yeah,
like what
but
you were saying, right? Um,
not so much that, but you could have like you have 10 people that are all wrong about a math problem and one person that's right, and then no matter how loud or how convincing the 10 people are, there is a truth at the end of the day. So it's more like disagreement doesn't necessarily tell you if there are or aren't moral facts or if morality is or isn't objective, because people could just be really, really bad at figuring out moral truths. So that's kind of the thing I'm getting at more so. And the whole crazy thought experiment about like having a lottery of which soul your body goes into thing, that's more of like here's this weird setup where technically there could be a correct answer for what like how you should set up a society, and that could be like a moral fact. So that's sort of where it's getting with that.
well, I definitely think that there's ways to set up a society, and I think that I mean, in my personal opinion, like America is doing just about the best job at like having a functional society. And I think that we've evolved to like live together as humans, but I still don't think that necessarily means objective um morality. Like when I think of objective morality, I think that there is, I mean, I guess you could answer objective morality as kind of like what you were saying, where there is an ultimate goal that we're ideally headed toward. Like
Mhm.
there's kind of like a morality on every single specific thing that we should be doing. And it's like, I don't know if it would still be objective morality. I think that it's something that we've, as humans, have come to agree upon, or at least humans in America, but like animals certainly don't agree with us. You know what I mean? And
Mhm.
it's kind of like more of like a right way to live as opposed to like a morality. And
Yeah, I guess this is like
I could be totally off here on my opinion on it. Like I said, I feel like there definitely is a right and a wrong. Like I feel like, and there's tiers to it on top of that. You know what I mean? Like stealing from Walmart is like, maybe like a
mhm.
two, but then like killing someone or whatever is like a 10, right? I mean,
Mhm.
but I just think that that's just like the way we've evolved to kind of like have to live together. And I think it's more has to deal with laws than it does with morality, I guess. But that's just my opinion. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I guess here's a oh, I'm missing my thought. Maybe I'll come back to me in a second. But the oh, here's like another argument. And to be clear, like I honestly don't know. I have no strong opinion about if it's objective or subjective because I just don't know enough. Um, what you can like let's say you look at like who becomes president in the US, right? There are rules. There's like a straight up like, you know, if um if you have an alien that comes down and they're like, hey, who's the president? There is a correct answer at this point, right? But the president is it's something that we just made up. Like that's not something that there's no president particle that's in the universe. It's something that's kind of subjective. And the fact people in the US made up this role, and then we made up the rules for this role, and then there's some truth about who fits the rules and who doesn't fit the rules in terms of who the current president is. And the idea would be that maybe morality is like there's rules that are constructed for it, but then there are correct answers afterwards. In the same way that like police officers or like money is sort of a construct that people make up. But then there are correct answers to like what you should invest in, or if a police officer pulls you over, you can't be like, you're a social construct. I don't need to worry about you. It's gonna not be great for you.
Yeah, but in terms of like the investing thing, I think that that kind of thing kind of could changes all the time, right? I feel like
Yeah, and I'm also do not take economic investing advice from me. Definitely not a good idea. But
yeah, yeah. But I mean, with best ways to make money could potentially change over time, right?
yeah, but there could be like things where it's like if you gambling at casino is probably not a good way to, get most of your income or like get a good retirement fund.
Yeah.
So there might be
Um,
like not a best answer, but there definitely are very wrong answers.
I think that what I might be talking about more is like natural morality. I don't know if there's necessarily like by natural I mean kind of like an inherent fundamental um like in our universe there's
Mm,
fundamental moralities that just exist. And it's like one thing that I think is kind of interesting is like I could say I mean honestly I don't really know that much about like certain other countries, but I know like in the Middle East, like I've heard that they'll like push women off of buildings or gay people off buildings, and they think that that's correct, or like they'll kill people in the name of not all of them, but like certain groups will do things where they think they're justified by doing it, like by their what I mean, or any religion will do this. I'm not trying to like point out any religion. I'm just saying in certain other countries they might justify what they're doing by some sort of like their own morality. And like what I call it wrong, yeah, but I don't know if like. And then another question would be like, let's just say a lion kills something and doesn't feel bad about it. Like a lion kills something, it eats it every day, doesn't feel
mm.
bad. Like are they kind of would they be counted in on an opinion about morality? I know you could say no because they don't think, but like that. But you kind of I think for a fundamental morality would have to be like across the board.
I
But then
guess
I think that what you could
hmm.
I think what you would say would be there's kind of like a goal where we're like headed towards, and that's like the ideal goal, and lions just don't have it right? That would be your
That
like
could be one. Another idea would be that you could have a morality that is really annoying and like a legal document where there's 55 different like tiny cases that play out differently. Or you could have a morality that's super general and that doesn't tell you if the morality is like objective or subjective. So imagine, it seems kind of weird to me, but imagine it's like a clause in somehow objective morality where like lions can just do what they want. And cats in general can just do whatever they want. Um, but then other animals don't get that same latitude, or humans specifically, for maybe silly reasons or really good reasons, do have a lot more responsibility. So I wouldn't look to the animal kingdom and then feel like either morality is objective or subjective because of that. I guess the thing I would wonder is like let's say God doesn't exist. Is there any hypothetical world you could imagine where there's like an objective morality if there isn't a God? And like how would things get set up in that kind of world?
no, I don't think there would be, right? If there's no God in any universe, then there wouldn't be any objective, right? I mean like
Mm,
you would almost have to appoint a president or whatever, like a leader, as basically making the ground. Well, I mean, you
mm.
could definitely say there's like a common morality, like there's like a morality amongst, and that's what I think that's basically what the law is. But I don't necessarily think that it's like. Do you feel like if somebody in Papua New Guinea or wherever, one of these like remote islands, who lives in, or the Amazon or whatever, who lives in tribes, like they kill someone and they just get away with it? Like, do you feel like they should be held to the same kind of like laws or whatever morality as we are? You know?
Um, in terms of laws, probably not because things are really different there. In terms of morality, like I think in probably average case, I'd say that's bad. There could be some crazy, like if there's some war going on, you can come up with crazy edge cases where you're like it was justified. But I would be, and this is really it's like my personal moral intuition is a bit different than is more, are moral facts subjective or not? I'm kind of like a weird mixture of like what actions are what actions bring out the best outcomes and like what are some virtuous actions. And I was very like unprincipled, weird mishmash of the two. If you've heard of like consequentialism and virtue ethics.
No.
Okay, so like consequentialism would be that the moral action is the action that maximizes the most amount of happiness for the most people. And then there are lots of like fancier versions on top of that. That's a basic idea. And then like the old saying like, oh, the ends justify the means, that can be like a consequentialist type idea sometimes. And then virtue ethics might be you should do whatever is a virtuous action. So you should do things that are courageous or do things that display honesty or um I'm trying to think, do actions that display like loyalty. And those are the correct moral actions, whatever is like the virtuous action. And then there are other kinds of moral theories that I probably don't have enough knowledge to explain. Um, there's like deontology is the other big one. It's sort of this interesting set of rules, I think. But yeah, I don't know if my personal morality would necessarily tell me about if the moral fact is subjective or not.
Yeah, because I mean, the whole problem with the ethics thing would be kind of like if your ethics are just different than mine. And like I said, like I intuitively believe in it. Like I hate to keep like name dropping people, but I listen to Sam Harris on that Alex O'Connor guy's podcast, and I don't know if you know do you know what an emotivist is?
Yeah, where you think like the like moral statements are basically just coded words for like how you feel about a thing, right?
Yeah, and Alex O'Connor was that, which I guess which means he doesn't believe in morality, or he's an atheist who doesn't. I would assume he doesn't believe in morality. I would assume that he
Mm.
that's what he was saying was basically like boo murder or whatever. And then Sam Harris was saying he thinks morality should strive towards the ultimate good for everybody. Like that's the goal is for.
Yeah, I think so I for consequentialism, the other word is utilitarian. You might have heard that one instead. I think yeah, Sam Harris would be
I
like
just
consequentialist.
recently like
Mm.
literally heard of utilitarian, so I'm just recently kind of hearing all these words, and I'm not good at. I'm
Mm.
definitely not like a philosophy guy, but yeah. So Sam Harris's view was good for everybody. Like if like you don't want somebody to get hurt, and that's morality basically. That's an objective morality that he believes in, and like I agree with them, but I don't necessarily know that I can tell somebody that they're wrong, like for not agreeing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's sort of this is in this is weird thing where it feels like the harder it is to argue with someone about something, the more we feel like it's kind of subjective. Where I feel like I can argue really well that like you did a math problem wrong. I'm gonna have an awful time trying to argue this thing I like is or isn't art. And I feel like that sometimes comes up in morality where it just feels like I don't know like what argument I can give you to switch to my set of morals from your set of morals. And because of that, it feels almost like it might be subjective. Um, it yeah, once again, I know I'm just saying like I don't know as a response to pretty much all these questions, but I feel like I wouldn't come down on either side, even if it was hard to convince someone.
Yeah. So I think I have to wrap things up here, and you probably do too. But the last thing I'll ask is, I guess, kind of going back to the neuroscience thing, which would be, um, so have you seen a show called Devs?
I don't think so. No, I'm pretty bad with the pop culture.
Oh yeah, so it was a pretty good show, and it was based on like a Google type company who had like quantum computing, and they essentially were trying to essentially predict the future and the past. So they were literally could like watch something play out. And
Hmm.
obviously I know we're not to that now and probably won't be for a while, but in one scene they literally showed some sort of, I don't know if it was an animal or like a little like microscopic thing, and they were able to predict like what it was going to do next. Do you think we're to that point, or do you think we'll ever be to the point where we'll be able to like kind of predict the future, and maybe even like a singular case of like what, like I know what I'm going to be able to figure out like what you're going to do next within the next,
Hmm.
whether it be a couple seconds or even maybe 5 minutes.
Maybe in like a second or something like that. But I think that the way I sometimes think about the brain is it's a chaotic system, kind of like the weather, where you can be like you can understand all the physics that goes into it and have all these incredible models, but at the end of the day, like it's still really tough to predict the weather, and we're probably never going to be able to say like 1 year out it's going to be raining outside your window specifically. I just don't think that'll be possible just because of how things called chaotic systems work. So I feel like the brain is it's probably going to be something similar to that, where just from the set of neurons you currently have or some facts about your neurons, I don't know if I'm going to be able to say super far out with 100% certainty what you'll do, or even with like a good amount of certainty. And there might be some edge cases. So like maybe imagine I could scan someone's brain and I could tell that they're like addicted to gambling, and I could guess like I probably in a year you might still be gambling. Like that might be an edge case, but in terms of just like a year from now, this is what you're going to be ordering on DoorDash. I can't imagine we'd ever be able to do that.
And do you think that goes forever, like the next 1,000 years, even potentially?
That would be my guess. Honestly, take everything I say with a grain of salt. I'm not up to date on all the predicting everything in the future technologies.
Yeah. And then how far, I don't know how much you know about AI or even just LLMs, but
Hmm.
how close do you think we are to AI to, I think Sam Altman said, supposedly I read that he said like maybe even super intelligence was coming this year, or at least general AGI. How close do you, or how well do you, I guess, think that they are, the AI or even the LLMs at predicting, or not predicting, at acting as humans, or do you think as of now it's kind of just like not a gimmick, but they're really not acting like humans at all? It's just kind of like a fancy way of like writing you an essay or whatever, you know?
I feel like I guess I don't feel like LLMs are conscious. So in that case, they're very, very different from people. If you want to say that it could be super intelligent and not conscious, I don't know when that would happen. I think my my tuition initially is that we're gonna have nothing close to like what humans do for 1,000 years right before ChatGPT released. And then I kind of felt like maybe I should push that timeline up a little bit. But at this point, I'm just kind of like waiting and seeing. I don't have a good intuition for it. I'd be very surprised if it was this year, but also that depends on how you define this stuff too.
Yeah, it's supposedly coming soon.
Hmm.
Like obviously a lot of this could be BS, but it's like I've heard some people say like they think that we might even like already be in like the singularity, which I don't know if you know
Hmm.
what that is, but
Yeah, whether the AIs are gonna improve themselves and just keep going.
yeah. And so I find that all pretty interesting. I think the next 5 to 10 years is going to be pretty interesting. I think it's an interesting time to live in. Do you think the AI will ever become are able? Do you think they'll ever be able to become conscious? Kind of like similar to the
Um,
the first question, simulating the brain. Do you think we'll be able to simulate the brain through AIs?
yeah, so if that functionalism idea is true, then I think technically you can have a machine that's conscious because you just need it wired up in the right way and doing the right operations, and then it counts as conscious just like a person does. Like I said, I don't think it's impossible, but I think it would take a very, very long time to make that kind of thing. But I also don't I don't know what consciousness is at this point, so I don't know how much I should be gambling on that, how certain I should be on that.
Yeah. So you think it's probably going to be like the information. What was the word? The three words you
Like the
used?
function or like
Or the
functionalism.
information.
Oh,
Um,
the integrated information theory, that
yeah,
idea?
integrated information theory. It's essentially just it's there's nothing special about our consciousness. You think eventually it's just a matter of getting the right things together to make them conscious.
Yeah, in the right way. And that's why I
Yeah,
lean toward I'm kind of low confidence on any theory of consciousness right now.
yeah.
But gun in my head, that's what I would pick.
Okay. And then lastly, I'll ask, are there any like movies, music, TV shows, podcasts you're into? And if you have, I don't know, do you have your own podcast or anything like that?
Nope, I just do research. I'd have a pretty tough
Okay.
time balancing them.
If you wanted to like plug anything that you're into or anything like any podcast on neuroscience or really anything you wanted to plug.
Um, podcasts on, yeah, I don't really also listen to many podcasts on neuroscience. I usually just listen to, honestly, just lots of music. So I've been listening to Sleep Omen or Sleep Token. Oh man, I don't know if people like that kind of music. They check that out. Kind of like more metal rockish. Um,
For some reason, I was gonna like predict metal for some odd reason. Like I don't think I know Sleep Token. I think I've heard of them, but I was gonna be like, are
mhm.
you into metal? What other metal bands? Are you into
Uh,
uh there's a new one out that came out that has like a it's like metal, but it has almost like a Pink Floydish kind of like they do like
oh, what's that?
blood incantation. I think they're like the
Blood
newest.
Incantation. Okay.
Yeah. But anyways, what else do you into in terms of metal? I think I've heard of Sleep
So
Token.
there'd be like some like Mastodon, some
Okay.
Opeth. What
Like
I hear some people get really intense when it comes to what counts as metal and doesn't. So I'm worried about saying a non-metal band.
some more like heavy rock kind of like
So yeah,
right?
yeah, if that's how you classify it as, then yeah, like heavy rock.
Yeah. All right. Well, it was nice having you on, Cameron. Thanks for coming on. And I know this was kind of like a last minute thing, and I actually have to end early and or it's later than I worked a lot later than I expected. So if you ever want to come back on, let me know. I love talking this philosophy stuff. So
Okay, yeah, it was fun. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
all right. Bye guys.